The land, the animals, and the people. Welcome to the Wolf Connection Podcast.
Before I welcome my esteemed guest here on the podcast, those of you that are listening, hopefully watching, we have released our first film in the Wild Roots series. So those of you who have seen us post about this, where we spoke with Ojibwe painter John Potter. It's called A Handful of Dirt. Please go check it out on the Wolf Connection YouTube. You can get links in our bio on Instagram. This is a continuation, a series that will hopefully yield many films, many episodes. And so check that out. It's out now. You guys can view it, like I said, on Wolf Connection YouTube, or go to the link in our bio on our Instagram to check out A Handful of Dirt, sign up for Wild Roots, and all that good stuff. My incredible guest today, welcome him back. I think it's been a little while. It's been probably over a year. Professor Emeritus of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at the University of Colorado in Boulder. He is an exemplar award winner for animal behavior from the Animal Behavior Society, and he is also the co-chair of the ethics committee for the Jane Goodall Institute. Professor Dr. Marc Bekoff, great to have you back, sir. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. It's great to be back. I really enjoyed our last chat, and I'm looking forward to this one. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
And for the main reason I reached back out to you is because I read your book. I finished Rewilding Our Hearts, and so many things really struck me. I didn't even finish the book before I reached out to you. I was probably halfway through, and I said, no, I need to have Marc back on to discuss so many things. I think before we get into the book itself, you had said this to me, and I totally agree. We need to touch on, obviously, Jane Goodall, her passing. It really seemed like you two so close, and you're working on, I think, a couple of projects before she ultimately passed on. I'd just love for folks to know from you what that relationship was like to be with her. You guys really, it seemed like, working together, having really the same track mind on a lot of things. What was just working with Jane or being with Jane in these scenarios like for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was really wonderful. I mean, we connected years ago, and we really we just formed a really close friendship, a colleagueship. I was the ethics committee for the Jane Goodall Institute for a number of years, and then I co-chair it now with a guy named Koen Margot, who lives in Belgium. So it's nice to have a co-chair, and I did a lot, and I continue to do a lot of work about Roots and Shoots, which is really her legacy. It's started off as an organization for youngsters, but I taught for about 16 or 17 years in the Boulder County Jail, a Roots and Shoots class. Roots and Shoots groups formed in refugee camps, senior citizen homes. One day, some years ago, I did events for 4-year-olds, inmates, and centenarians within 8 hours. There was 98 years difference between the 4-year-olds and this man at this assisted living center in Boulder, Colorado, where I live, who was 102.
Wow.
But it was just really great. Jane, she was a rock star. She still is. Just great storyteller, and also a great scientist. People kind of, some overlook it, but her book, The Chimpanzees of Gombe, that she published 40 years ago now, 1986, was as solid science as you'll ever see. Great storyteller, and she had a great sense of humor. And she used to lament that people didn't appreciate her sense of humor. There was actually an article in The Guardian about her saying, why don't people realize that I have a great sense of humor? And the light side of things, we both enjoy good PT single malt scotch. But she was a woman for all seasons, and I'm just not saying that lightly. She very careful scientist, very careful writer, really would ask hard hard questions of people and me. You know, when we were doing stuff, we completed a young kids book, the text before she passed away. And that book will appear in February of 2027. And the exchanges were detailed editing. You know, some people said, well, she's so busy, she just puts her names on things. No. No, I can tell you right now. So all in all, to summarize it, it was a great 30 or 35 years. I mean, really powerful. I miss her. I talk to her every day. And what you saw was the real Jane, but a lot of people didn't see her sense of humor and the rigor with which she approached everything she did. Yeah.
I think, that those are the things that we only see the surface level, maybe, of what we want to see. And that's a great analogy that you use, that she would maybe just put her name on things. And I never got the sense of that. I feel like she took care in everything that she did. And I didn't know her personally. I met her once, but you could just feel the aura that radiated off of her just from being in her orbit. And it was so loving and kind and really just all that. Do you, for you, obviously you guys have this book coming out in 27. What's her legacy from your perspective as someone who worked with or worked beside and, was a colleague for 35 years? If you can encapsulate the legacy from your end, what do you think it will be, or what do you think people will take away from all the work that she's done?
Yeah, I think a lot of it will focus on Roots and Shoots. It's now called Jane Goodall's Roots and Shoots. Like I said, it began with youngsters, but it's really the organization into which she put a lot of time and heart, because it's educational. Deals with, animals, people, in the environment, which spell ape. And it's all about educating. And, some of the bumper stickers are everyone can make a difference, act locally, think globally. I love thinking about international projects, which I've been involved in, but a lot of the stuff I've done around Boulder and in Colorado would be helping animals and their homes, if you will, and
right.
People too. And so the other aspect was, there's a movement now called the First Health Initiative, and it's really it really focuses on what's good for non-humans is good for humans.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And we gave her this book for her 90th birthday. And we surprised her. That was actually the coup, because we invited about 100 people. We got 90 essays to celebrate her 90th birthday, and people were saying, "You'll never keep it secret." And about the time we wanted to release it, we were beginning to think that some of them were right. So around New Year's of December, the turn from December 2023 to 2024. We had a Zoom and we gave it to her, and it's called One Health, not First Health. The One Health move, but I think education and empowering people would be among the big, her legacy, that everyone can make a difference, no matter how small. If it's a positive difference in the world, it really matters. Yeah.
I mean, everything that I've seen from the Jane Goodall Institute, a lot of what I've seen, when they share wisdom and words from her, it really is about that you have the power, as you said, no matter how small, tall, young, old, no matter what it is, wherever you come from, there is a difference that can be made there. And that really, segues, I think, beautifully into Rewilding Our Hearts and the book that you've written. I think it's 12 years now, and we were talking just before we started recording that this book seems to be having a little bit of a resurgence, which I think is poignant in the moment and the time that we're in, that people are looking to these words and looking to maybe these practices that we'll get into here. And I'd love for you to really just describe I know it's probably a loaded question, but just in, a little bit of what you can of what rewilding our hearts, means for you. And then we'll obviously get into the rest of it. And I have, quotes layered in. But if someone says, what entails rewilding our heart? If someone were to ask you that.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's actually a huge question, but it really means that we rewild from the inside out. That came from my editor for that book while we were talking about things, meaning that all the things we do in the world, no matter what they are, begin with us. I mean, that's not somebody said to me, that's deep philosophy. And I went, no, it's really pretty shallow, actually. But it does. I mean, you choose, on average, who to eat, who to hang out with, what to do, blah, 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 blah. And so we have to incorporate the change we want inside, and rewilding our hearts means that we're rewilding by paying attention to our feelings. When I was a kid, I could always tell my folks that I could feel the emotions of the animals when I was like 3 years old growing up in Brooklyn, New York. I'd meet dogs and cats and rats and mice and ants and birds. And my parents never doubted that. I think they thought I was somewhat nuts, but they never discouraged me from doing it. It's the same with Jane when she would watch chickens lay eggs and come into a house covered with mud and ants. And I think the parental support was really important over the years, knowing that I was validated, if you will, while a lot of other people had no idea what we were doing. But from my dad, I think I learned that it begins with you. And so the title actually emerged as I was not really deep into the book, but I was just trying to think of what am I doing here? And the word rewilding was always there. And then I said, well, really what you're doing is rewilding. You're rewilding your heart, meaning my heart.
Right.
And my editor loved it. And that was it. So it's beginning with yourself, paying attention to the values you hold and the changes you want to see in the world, positive, I hope, and accepting responsibility for it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I resonate with all of that, and it really leads to, I think, and as I mentioned, when I'm reading a couple of these chapters and I'm seeing the text, I go, wow, this is more relevant, I would think, almost now, where we have, if we go back 12 years, technology, in terms of phones and computers, everything now is amplified by X amount. And it leads me to, this when and why people are unwilding. And, and this relationship, because you do this so well, and Jane did, but for you in particular, how does this unwilding, when and why we're unwilding, and describe, I guess, what that unwilding means, and how does it relate to our really losing our feelings, I think, of empathy and love? I mean, that's what I'm noticing, at least personally, and seeing this distancing or just not wanting to connect in ways that I think are natural to us as humans. What do you think on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with like a person immersing themselves, into their surroundings. It could be flora, fauna, other humans, expressing their feelings, not being embarrassed, that, I'm a man and I have feelings. I mean, seriously, or a little boy and I have feelings. The unwilding, though, just begins almost at birth, if you will, in many ways. I mean, I think we all come out with cravings. There's a lot of debate about the concept of biophilia, and I don't get involved in it. I just kind of think that we all, for the most part, have attractions to, nature, other nature, outdoors. But it's really taken from us immediately when you go to school. I know things are different now than when I went to school, but they're not all that different. I mean, I was doing roots and shoots groups this spring. And it's a very progressive school. Kids are really bright, but there's still certain amounts of being inside and, following rules. And I'm not against rule following for decorum at all. But at this school, the kids get outside every day. They had rescued chickens, for example. There were some other rescued animals there. But in general, the unwilding just happens during the natural development or ontogeny of a human being. I just love going to dog parks where there are kids and dogs or playgrounds. And then all of a sudden you're indoors, there are certain rules to follow and you can have the rules. And I think they're important, but the kids don't get out. And social media, time in front of the computer. The question you're asking is interesting because I don't watch the news, but I watch little banners. And it turns out that a lot of executives now of, different electronic devices, different games, have restricted their kids to 90 minutes a week on social media. I just saw it within the last hour as a banner. So the joke, of course, from the news commentator was most kids today, or I don't remember the number, but a significant percentage of kids, and I would include preteens and teens, are on their devices all the time, literally. Well, that means that you can't be outside, just free in nature, if you will, and smelling the flowers or watching bees or birds or squirrels or, wherever you live. So the unwilding, I think, has become incorporated into the curriculum of growing up. It just is. Mine was very different because I was born in Brooklyn and my folks, we moved to Long Island when I was about 6 years old. And right across the street, this was before Long Island was developed, there were potato farms around. I mean, it was really rural in some cases. And right across the street was a wooded area. I spent all my time there, and when I talk to my folks and my friends that, who are around the same age or younger, it was safe to be there. There wasn't the scare you'd get bitten by a coyote or be attacked by a fox or by a person. No, I mean, I really mean it. And I could walk the mile or two to school when I was in kindergarten and first grade, and I would see animals and I would look at pretty flowers. But now, over the last decade, a bunch of decades, it's really emerged where, I see it around Boulder, which is a beautiful place to live. And it's so easy to get out where the kids don't spend much time outdoors. So the rewilding is an action. It's a move that you have to make to extricate yourself from the confines, if you will, of more formal education. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned this in the book too a little bit about, folks who, kids go out for recess, and recess is not necessarily the same thing as having that humane, or you were talking a little bit too about like the humane education and rewilding in that sense that, if we have more schools that have sort of those more natural, instinctual maybe activities of, maybe helping with chickens or doing things outside, tending to a garden, so we feel sort of the elements around our bodies where we don't necessarily do that anymore. We shield ourselves from a lot of the elements now where we used to encapsulate ourselves in those things and really feel the dirt, the wind, the water, all of those things. And and obviously people have, whether it's, disease things that they have to be careful of in certain elements, and that's fair. But it's almost as though we've lost our tolerance of being in the outdoors. Does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, no, absolutely. My mother was somewhat of a clean freak, but when I came home covered in mud or when I came home dirty, it wasn't like a huge thing. You changed your clothes and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And there's just so much distraction these days. I felt even when I was in university that I could do the things I needed to do, but I wasn't distracted by incessant input. I don't watch the news these days, but 24/7 news, and there's not enough to fill 24/7 news on the plethora of channels that do 24/7 news. And I think there's expectations on kids too now to just grow up too fast. I mean, I don't know what growing up really means. I mean, I know what it means in a way, but I hear, and I listen to people talking about, no, you can't do that. There were very few things that I was told I couldn't do that were, they were good things, you know what I mean? But yeah, you can go outside. You can go out early in the morning or late or at night and watch the animals. You can't do that in most places. It's not safe for kids. I hate to say it. And we had no distractions. TV was around, but, you could watch the Ed Sullivan Show and get bored to death or, things like that. But really, there weren't the distractions. And the people I'm still in touch with some people over decades, and we feel very fortunate that we were free to be kids. That's really what it came down to. And to do what you really felt that you wanted to do, you needed to do, and we were outside. I mean, I honestly think that is just a big component, whether you're playing stickball, in the circle where we lived, or you're just hiking through the woods, and it was safe to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. And I think, getting into sort of this compassion and coexistence that you talk about, and I put, it almost could be a song, because the way I put it in the outline, compassion and coexistence, parentheses, not all about us. I could hear somebody, singing that, is you really talk about like this way that, yes, we as humans are so unique. And yeah, we've developed all of these, as you say, distractions, and we have these things around us, and we're unique in these good and bad ways, but we influence heavily our non-human counterparts. Just describe those factors, because when you lay them out, it's both, there is an achievement aspect of it, but it's also incredibly daunting and scary when you look at the ways that we are influencing our non-human counterparts and losing that compassion to coexist with these things. Whereas maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago, those things were not there. So talk about those factors, because they I think are really central to what we're discussing.
So if I'm reading you right, and maybe I'm not, but
Please.
I remember that when I would go out with my friends, and just, even when I was in my 20s and 30s, and I was actually doing field work in Antarctica, and I was doing work on coyotes in Jackson, we were always sensitive to the fact that our presence was influencing the animals.
Right.
No, I mean, yeah, there's been a lot of studies that support that, but I mean, if you were tuned into nature, you knew that you became part of the scene. But I do remember growing up, my mom maybe, or other people saying, well, don't disturb the squirrels. I mean, they weren't citing some animal rights philosophy. Peter Singer had not written Animal Liberation, and at that point, I'm sure I couldn't have read it,
Right.
But I think, but there were restrictions, and I think they're lifelong. Jane and I talked about it a bit too, that, it's like imprinting. Okay,
Right.
it's like you imprint on food, you imprint on certain things, you imprint on where you live. If you're a chicken, you imprint on your mommy, and so it was almost like, to me, ecological imprinting, where I would feel the draw. I mean, even now, I have to get out every day and ride my bike. I'm a cyclist, so I have to get out. And I jokingly say the world is a better place for me to get when I get out. Yeah. But everybody who does this kind of thing knows that, you have to follow your passion, and be sensitive to your surrounds, the flora and fauna, I mean, trees and flowers and grasses. We step on, but I think that, I hadn't thought about it a lot, but I just, part of it was being sensitive, and part of it was almost, it becomes part of who you are.
The Wolf Connection podcast is now sponsored by our new partner, Jacques-Marie Mage. This LA-based brand is known for their limited edition, handcrafted eyewear and luxury goods, but also for their stewardship program, which supports various nonprofits and individuals who are working to protect a future for wild wolves.
Exactly. I mean, some of the things I'll read off too, because I found this and I marked this because it speaks to me. You know, we're the only species that cooks food, the only species who makes and uses fire, the only species who engages in mass murder and wages global war. Just things like that we, I think, as a society and as an animal, understanding that, yes, we are developed beyond our non-human counterparts. There are some things, only the species to hold bake sales. You have some different things in here. The only species who uses computers, Twitter, Facebook at the time. The only species who has tried to leave the planet. I think there are just things in there where it's like we're developing to leave as opposed to developing to reconnect and coexist, you know?
Yeah, you know, what you just said, it's funny, I was writing about this a couple of weeks ago. I think it's related that the world has become so messy and so complex. I think people are fighting to retain their own identity. And that was not a problem early on. You know, I never would have thought about that years ago. You know, I basically, along with my friends, did the things we like to do. We were hoping we weren't harming anybody, but non-human or human or their homes. But our identity wasn't locked up in that. You know what I mean? It was
yes, I do.
It was just what we really enjoyed doing, and we could do it. And the world was a very, very different place. I mean, there weren't signs all over the place saying no trespassing. I mean, of course, there were some, but it's also due to the population explosion, which is nothing new. I mean, everybody knows that I could go for a really long time over weekends and holidays, just hanging out with a few of my friends who lived on the block where I lived and go across to the wooded area, you know, where I lived.
Yeah.
Sometimes just sit there, you know, every now and again we'd rub sticks to see if we can start a fire, which of course we couldn't, and we're glad we didn't. But it's also just getting the reinforcement of, I don't know, what would be the word? Yeah, the reinforcement that we're doing something that we really, really like. It's cheap and it's there for free. Right.
And it's part of our instinctual being, isn't it, Mark? I mean, we're part of this. We're part of this huge. I mean, people always make the correlation or the parallel of, you know, we're on a large blue marble that's whipping around the universe at X, you know, however many hundred miles an hour, and or thousands or however many, you know, how fast it is. I'm sure somebody will message me about that. But yeah, we just sort of losing that. That sort of the connection, that intrinsic, intentional wanting to be a part of it, as opposed to I'm going to distance myself and be away from it. And you said something too about identity and a little bit about sort of like the no trespassing and that, and we see more of that of like, this is my plot, this is my space. I don't want anyone sort of to do that. And this one came to me too, you know, how do we keep our non-human animals at the forefront of these small changes that we're starting to talk about, of rewilding in these efforts when we talk about conservation, while not being driven by our own interests? Because that sometimes gets in the way. Our own interest of like keeping our space, doing our thing, but I also want to help our non-human counterparts. You know?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think as if you will, human life has become more complicated. I don't mean that in a negative way, but it's become more complicated. You know, people feel that they have to keep up with everything, and I don't know how they do. I'm a really good multitasker, And I can reach my limit really fast in terms of paying attention to, different things. I think part of the personal rewilding comes from focusing in on what you want and need, but not in an egocentric way. I mean, what I want and need for me is no more important than what you want and need for you. And you can expand that to the population at large, hoping that what you want and need and everyone else wants and need are positive, helpful, pro-social, compassionate, respectful, kind things.
Yeah.
That you can achieve in many different ways. But I notice it among people in my age group and younger, attention or lack thereof. And once again, I don't think it's because they're weak or not intelligent. I think they don't focus. Maybe they can focus. Once again, not meant in a negative way, but they don't focus. And I've had this discussion with a few people that my early life on the streets of Brooklyn, watching animals carefully, and then doing it throughout my life and cutting. God, I cut elementary and high school classes whenever I could. It wasn't to go to the beach on Long Island. It was really, I spent most of the time just watching squirrels running here and there. And there's a philosopher, John Haldeman, who calls it slow watching.
I remember that,
yeah. What it really is careful observation, which is really the foundation of ethology. And I'm an ethologist. And sometimes when you're watching people, it gets you in trouble because they think you're staring at them and analyzing them. No, I'm not. I'm just watching their behavior and how they socially interact or interact with themselves. But once again, I think it comes down to being patient and realizing how much is out there in a very simple way. Seeing, hearing, smelling, touching. But once again, incorporating all these senses into a cocktail that comes right back to the heart.
Right.
You can, I mean, people say, well, you live in Boulder and that's where all the crystals and the fluff are. So, which isn't true. Well, it's sort of true, but no, it's got nothing to do with that. But once again, I think it goes back to early years or early imprinting. And I don't think people realize how important those early years were and are later in life. But I know the things that I seek out now just to get away from it all, or that motivate me to go learn something new or do something, are the same things that I sought and with which I felt comfortable decades ago.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, when you talk about, because I do remember now that you mentioned slow watching, I remember that from the book. What does that instinctually do for us? I know you mentioned it sort of connects everything back to the heart, but does that bring us back to something a little bit more instinctual? Is that something that it doesn't have to be instinctual, it might be the wrong word, but that we are taking, like you said, taking in all our surroundings and using all of our senses at once. It doesn't seem like we typically do that anymore. We're very either touch centric or hearing centric, whatever it may be, with whatever job or profession that we have. So if we take in slow watching, is this something that, I don't know if you could speak to it or not, that maybe could reset or start to sort of reset our nervous system a little bit, to sort of calm ourselves a little bit and be a little bit more focused, as you mentioned just a few minutes ago, that we're not focused on these things. We're not just, watching this squirrel for minutes or maybe half hour, hours at a time, and collecting that information.
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's a really good question. And to me, the easy answer, just because of what I do, is that there's always more to learn. There's always more detail. So over the years, if I think about my research on development of behavior, play behavior, aggressive behavior, territorial behavior,
right,
all sorts of behavior, how I used to say this all the time, and I haven't recently, but after 8.5 years of watching, an 8.5 year field study in the Grand Teton National Park, there was somebody out there, probably 99% of the total number of days, postdoc and some grad students and some undergraduates, we were still learning things. The learning curve asymptotes, it fades off. You get to meet somebody or you meet a dog, and over time, you've learned a lot about them, but the initial learning curve is vertical, and then it just tails off. We were still learning things after thousands of human hours in the field about these coyotes. So I'm not saying what we were learning after 8.5 years was as important as the initial surge in information, but, maybe there was something there. So the reason I say that is that I also, among a lot of people I know, they get bored so easily. And I don't even know what that word means. I mean, I really, because people will say to me, close friends will say, you're boring. And I'll go, all right, fine, I'm boring. I don't think I'm boring, but if you think I'm boring, then I'm boring to you. But there's always something I learn, and I don't mean learn in an academic way. But like just right now we're working, or I'm doing it alone right now. I think I might, on ideas for a new book. And I'm sitting there looking at stuff just yesterday going, how in the world didn't I put these things together 20 years ago? Well, I didn't. Right. And once again, coming back to Rewilding Our Hearts, I think it was that epiphany. I had written a book called The Animal Manifesto about, the subtitle was How We Can Expand or Increase Our Compassion Footprint.
Right.
And it's funny because I had not even thought about this till recently, and I haven't really talked about it to anybody. But that book was done, and I was thinking about some new books, and that idea about expanding our compassion footprint, because at the time, and still people were talking about carbon footprint. And it was thinking about that, rereading the book so many times that I think I wanted to burn it one night because I was done with it, was what got back to the self, if you will, but not in an egocentric self. More, Mark, what you do comes from you. I mean, yes, others affect you, but in terms of feeling, once again, the word feeling comes up, how you convert your feelings and thoughts into action begins right here. Yeah, it goes to your brain, but it's good to shut your brain off every now and again because your brain can stop you from doing a lot of things that would be very nice and useful, to the world. But it gets back to, so the reason I'm saying that, it gets back to detail. I remember rereading parts of the Animal Manifesto and say, God, you are dumb. How could you not see this? Well, as you know, and people who write, and you don't see everything. If you did, you'd be done at age 2. But I think that rewilding became the unifying principle. That's the way I would look at it. It's kind of like a principle that can apply to your own personal self, your heart. The word rewilding came from trying to reestablish and rewild populations of carnivores back in the early 90s, Michael Soule and David Foreman. A lot of people think that rewilding is a new word. No, it's not. It's been around probably 40 years. But their ideas were the same. How do we rewild habitats? How do we bring back the animals who should be there?
Right. Yeah.
So how do you bring back the feelings that you had years ago when you were allowed to express them or had the time to express them? Well, I would always just help make the time.
Yeah. And you talk about this compassion, again, a beautiful segue. It's as if he's read the outline. No, I'm just kidding.
I actually did.
You did, I know.
But I'm not cheating.
No, I know. But this is what I love about this, though, is that there is this compassionate element of it. And this is the next, I think it's the fourth chapter, I think. Making it real, hard choices, bottom lines. And you talk about this compassion and that when we reach this point of having compassion and we want to do rewilding because it is constant, how do we reconcile with ourselves knowing that we have to, that there are sacrifices to be made along the way. Because to be, personally, this is how sometimes I feel, where I'm putting my efforts into helping a specific species, doing the things they need to do there, and then realizing maybe halfway, quarter way, almost all the way to the end through, are we harming, or am I harming other species that may be more intrinsic or more, necessary? And that might be the wrong word also, but necessary to make sure that these, like you said just before, ecosystems and these things thrive, and so that it would build upon itself. How do we wrestle with that compassion to want to rewild a specific species, but know there may be some casualties along the way, to make sure, like, if we have to do the right thing, as we're always taught, what's the right thing, and how to feel compassionate about that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because it's almost like a systems level question.
Right.
You do something about A, how can you be sure you're not negatively influencing B, C, D, and E, and F, for example?
Right.
The way I do it, because I love working with people, is the minute almost the second I start thinking about something, I'll immediately look to see, say something about the behavior of sympatric, or species that live in live in the same area, or go online to see if there's research. But for me, I love working alone, but I love working with a team where we can share ideas. Once again, people used to say, you can't share those ideas. People will steal them. And I'd say, nobody's going to steal ideas, because no one's going to overnight do an 8.5-year study on coyotes or a few months study on penguins. I mean, that's the advantage of ethology. But, I know people who are neuroscientists, and they won't talk about their research because 4 hours later, another lab will have done the studies and published a paper. I really mean that. So part of the answer to your question is working as a team, sometimes with people and sometimes with people you don't know, trusting them, which is huge, but realizing that you're just kind of one chess piece on the play on the board. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah.
My work isn't any more or necessarily less important than those of others, but also working with people who are serious about what they're doing and work hard. I hate to say it that way, get back to Jane. I mean, she worked hard all the time, and I knew if I had a question that I needed an answer to, and she said, I can't answer it right now, it wasn't because I was getting blown off. It was because she wanted to provide the answer that would be the best answer.
Right.
So I really like the team approach. I like talking to botanists. I like talking to, people who, I sort of am an evolutionary biologist, but what I know compared to them, you would put in a thimble. But talking to these people about how to integrate what they're learning, because it's multi-level. So once again, getting back to rewilding your heart, your heart, my heart,
our hearts collectively.
It gets back to working with people. I've done some work with social psychologists. I've done some work with conservation psychologists, economists, philosophers. I mean, I've had the opportunity of working with real high-end philosophers whose work I actually came to understand. Because when they'd be talking and I'd feel like I'm in outer space, I would say, I need to ground you. I'm not as smart as you. I'm watching the animals and you're playing around with these different theories or schools of philosophy. But in a serious way, I always say that working with the philosophers I worked with, they made me a better scientist. They really did. They taught me about, it was seamless. Because I would educate them in animal behavior and ethology, and they would just tighten my reasoning. There's no other way to put it. And I've said that I could name some, but they made me a better ethologist.
Yeah, and that's what we need. Is we need that really that pack or that group mentality to really, explore our unique gifts that we have that might not fully come to term when we're doing the work that we're doing or the research that's happening. And I want to mention the 8 P's of rewilding that you have in there, which is, I think, a beautiful guide for action. And they're all P's if you read it. But so proactive, positive, persistent, patient, peaceful, practical, powerful, and passionate. So these are all these things. Go ahead.
There's 5 more, and I was just looking them up, and I can't find them. But one of them is being proud. But over the years, it's now called the 13 Ps.
Oh, it's 13 now? Okay.
Yeah. But right, I mean, the bottom line for those and the bottom line for the sort of new grouping is being patient, persistent, polite. That's another one, right? And avoiding it starts with the P, pissing matches, where you're not going to change and someone else isn't going to change. Respect them and move on. I'm doing that now. I've had to do that a lot now with the reintroduction of wolves to Colorado. There's people who don't want them here. They want to kill them. I don't. And some of the people, I have to say, who disagree with me on those values, I really like them. They're, people say, how could you like them this? Well, I think they're nice people. We just disagree. But the other one is really being polite. And it's okay to say, you're not going to change. I'm not going to change. Let's move on. I mean, and that's it, but yeah, and being proud. I remember this woman added it at the end of a talk I gave some years ago, but we have nothing to defend. Being compassionate about other animals and their homes, treating them with more respect and kindness and dignity and whatever word you want to throw in there. I don't feel like I have anything to defend.
Right.
But
and these are our counterparts within the world that we live in, and we're just all these cogs in this wheel that we have sort of, I think, lost a little bit. We've lost some of that. I wouldn't say all of it, but some of it, to where we don't, getting back to, like you say, rewilding our heart and being compassionate about it and understanding sort of the way that we really should fit into these things. I know we have a few more minutes here. We're getting a little time.
Sure.
But there's a couple more things, and then I obviously want to plug the new book that you have coming out. The media we kind of touched on a little bit. I want to get your thought too, because you mentioned this was in 2014. And again, I think with the more as technology continues to grow and impact things, is there a way, or not a way, is there a notion to say we should almost encourage AI usage when we talk about animals in sort of non-human animals within the constructs of these movies, these media pieces, things of that sort, unless you're actually filming them consciously and not interrupting, their way of life? Because I know that was one of the parts of your chapters there is, reframing these stereotypes with animals within these animated films and things like that. And the process when we use real animals, there's still, abuse and things that are happening, whether it says no animals have been harmed. How would you take it where we are now as we're jumped 12 years forward from the book? Do you think it's something we should consider as encouraging the use of computer generated animals and using that as opposed to using live animals?
My position is, and I've been very open about it, is do it very carefully,
right? And
talk to people like me, or people who actually study animals. I do a lot of work on dogs, and I've had some discussions with people where I feel very, I hate to say it, very comfortable with what they're doing, and some with whom I don't. That's all. Don't lose the animal. That's kind of, and that was a bumper sticker for me decades ago, was you're studying the animals. Don't lose them. Don't lose their perspective. What's their view of the world? What senses do they use? And that's what I feel. So I think, it's no different than anything else. It's like, be really careful. There's going to be better and not so good programs, and you're using AI and other things, But I can tell you right now that on the web, there's enough real footage. I mean, real footage from animals in their homes where you can get a lot of great information, just
using that as opposed
using
to
that.
as opposed to creating. And
yeah,
it's
right. I mean, the computer generated, what is it? CGI's, computer generated. I was just watching the first release of the Planet of the Apes, the replays back in 2011, just last night.
Yeah.
And
I mean, just what an incredible job they did with Andy Serkis. And that was all Andy Serkis doing that motion capture. So and there were no apes used, which is, that's the ideal you want. Yeah.
Right. So I think it's just something we need to stay on top of like anything else.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we touched on this in the beginning about, children or wilding our future and things of that sort, creating this compassion early on. Giving more wild play, if you want to touch on that, sort of wild play and resilience, because you've noticed it in your research and noticing animals playing and having sort of that, that balance of sort of it's too much. And so there's corrections that happen. Do you see this as a way, obviously you talked about more wild classroom settings, meaning there's a little bit in the classroom, there's more outside too, where we can get to sort of see those types of play. Do you think this is a way to continue to rewild the future generations, is to have them experience those types of things in the settings that would be more natural?
I do. I don't know, maybe it was 10 or 12 years ago, I gave a series of talks in Europe based on that. And I wrote a book in 2008 called Animals at Play, and it shocked me how many school psychologists, who was working with kids, wanted to interview me and use the rules of fair play, and wild play in playgrounds. Yeah. And I remember that, and let them be kids, and I got a little grief from some people, but very few. So, but it's interesting. There's a guy named Peter Gray who teaches in Boston. And I wrote a paper some years ago called The Golden Rules of Play in Dogs and Other Animals. Ask first, modify your behavior, take into account what the other animals are doing. And he applied it to play in human children. And the same rules obtain. But I'll tell you right now, something that's really interesting. I had this conversation just 2 days ago, is years ago, kids could go rough and tumble play in the sandbox. Can't do it today. There's too many lawsuits. So-and-so got their clothes dirty, or they scratched themselves. The boys and girls could play together. No, I'm serious. Not today. And I've had teachers over the years really lament the fact that this wild play that you see in non-humans at different ages, the different, males and females, boys and girls, could play together. No problem. It's much more restrictive today. And that's a whole other topic we could talk about sometime. But you still see that in the wild. Wild coyotes and foxes and wolves and kangaroos and elephants don't read the paper.
No, they don't. That's absolutely correct.
I envisioned a book a few years ago, what the world would be like if these animals actually read the news.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I know. I don't think we'd want to see that. There'd be a lot of things going on.
But your question is a really important one that we just can't do some of the things educationally that we did years ago. And I've had teachers whose careers have spanned from the 80s till just recently. And it's been a remarkable change. And for me, I think it's been a change for the worse in terms of letting kids express their youth and their rewilding proclivities, if you will, and then pull them back when they're pushing the envelope. Yeah.
Exactly. Look, I know we have a couple of things here. So I want you to promote your book, but there were two quotes at the very end that I wanted to read here.
Oh, no, please do. I'm fine.
From Alice Walker, the most common way people give up power is by thinking they don't have any. I love that.
Yes.
And then Barbara King, we humans become human through our interactions with other animals. Knowing this fact gives us a new way to think about our responsibilities to help our hurt natural world today. As we save other animals, we'll be saving ourselves.
Yeah.
And Barbara that hit me at the very end. That was in the afterword of this book.
And that's sort of a prelude, if you will, to the One Health, One Ecology movement. There's a guy named Jeff Sebo at NYU, and he wrote a really great book, the bottom line of which is what helps them, other animals, helps us. What hurts them, hurts us. And I really think that this is a great sort of ending for this discussion, because the basis of rewilding ourselves, if you will, is to be positive, to expand the compassion footprint. That was the link I made about 10 years or 12 years ago. And I had this aha phenomenon. And I remember saying, God, Mark, you must be dumb. How did you not see this 4 years ago? And I went, well, you're not so dumb. You just didn't see it.
Yeah.
But that it's so true. And, some people get upset when I talk about One Health or the One Ecology movement. They'll say, well, we really want people to bond with animals and feel close to them inherently because they value the animal. Yes, I would agree to that. But anything they can do to help the animal, dog, cat, lion, elephant, snail, I don't think the elephant cares what their motivation is. I think they just want to know they're going to be treated with more respect and dignity. But I do think that connection, what helps them helps us, is an important catalyst, for the future. I just do.
Absolutely. Please promote. I know you have another book coming just in a couple of weeks, actually. So tell everybody, the next book. We'll put the link in our bio of what that is, but tell everybody what's coming here. What do we got here?
It's called Love in Our Hearts. Love in Their Hearts, a celebration of animal emotions and a guide to compassionate action. So it's, thank you for asking. It's a book written for young adults, preteens and teens, but it's really written for the masses. All the adults and teachers and other people who have read it love it. So in 2024, I published a second edition of The Emotional Lives of Animals.
Yep.
And this flowed from it. I was going to say it flew from it, but they're completely different books. I mean, really very, and we love this book because at the end of each chapter, there's a guide to what you could do. Jane Goodall wrote a beautiful foreword, and there's a whole a lot of information on there in there about empowering youngsters using the principles of roots and shoots.
Beautiful.
And
I love that.
Yeah, and the book was, people said, "Oh, it's just another Jane thing." First of all, I said, don't ever say that to me. And second of all, no, it's not. I mean, the book was completed before she passed away. It had nothing to do with anything. But it gets back to, and I'm proud to say, and it really makes me emotional, is just the number of people she touched as a scientist and a messenger of peace, and her eclectic perspective on the world. I mean, you probably know it and people have read it, but what I love about this book, and I've had some adults go through the draft, is they said, "Oh, now I know what you were talking about." And I'm going, whatever.
Hey.
But simplifying compassionate conservation, and just being nice.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we need. More love, more nice.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway,
No,
wow. I love talking to you, Tom.
I love talking to you too. I really do. This is, look, if, I will say this. So we'll have the link to the new book that's coming in a couple of weeks in the link in the description. Rewilding Our Hearts, Emotional Lives of Animals. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Marc has published 30 books. We're on his email list. So many wonderful things. This really was a great conversation. I love diving into these topics with you and having these discussions and putting, like you say, a little bit more compassion and love out into the world when there's a lot of negativity and things that could come out of it. So thank you, Marc. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. And thank you to your audience. Any
Absolutely.
questions? Contact me.
Exactly. Just hang tight while we sign off here. How's to you all out there? We'll be with you next time. Bye, everybody.
Looking for more information about Wolf Connection or the podcast? Visit our website at wolfconnection.org, where you can donate, sponsor a wolf, or become a volunteer. Thank you for listening.